Hey, welcome back everybody. Today we're going to be finishing up our salami section of our Boston butt breakdown for the home charcuterie. And so what I've done here is I've taken the remainder of our pork shoulder, I've weighed it out to 2.5 pounds, and I've cut it into cubes. They're about 3/4 of an inch cubes. Now I've set them into the freezer. You can see they're pretty firm, and that's just so that I get nice definition in my sausage between the fat and the meat when I'm grinding it. If it's too warm, if this meat is loose like it just came out of your package, what's going to happen is your grinder is going to tear the meat and it's going to do what's called a smear rather than a grind, and that's going to leave you with a lumpy sausage. It's going to leave you with a sausage that doesn't have those nice round bits of meat and round bits of fat which you associate with a nice salami. So what I have laid out on the plate here are the different seasonings that we're going to use today. Again, these will be in the details section of this video so you can look up the exact measurements. I have about 24 grams of salt for 2.5 pounds of meat. Now I know I'm switching between conversions there, but that's just, all of these measurements are in grams so that I can get them more accurate. 2.5 pounds is just so that you can make a nice measurement at home. And so here I have my dextrose, I have my curing salt number 2. Again, we're using curing salt number 2, sodium nitrate and sodium nitrite. This is a dry cured sausage. It'll be in my chamber for quite a while, so I want that delayed release of the sodium nitrate, not so much as cure number 1, sodium nitrite, which is for a quicker cure, which I'm then going to smoke. So then I also have some black pepper here. That's a fine ground black pepper, freshly ground. What I like to do to get an accurate weight on that is to weigh the peppercorns first, put them into an empty pepper mill, and then grind until all of that is done. That's easier than grinding continuously to weigh it out. That'll take you quite a while. So then I also have some chopped up garlic here. I've chopped that really fine and then mashed that. You can achieve the same thing in a mortar and pestle or in your food processor. This right here is some coriander, some allspice, and then we're also using a little bit of fennel powder today. You can find that at your grocery store. That'll give it that nice licoricey flavor that some of us associate with salami. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just take all of these ingredients. Again, you can get exact measurements in the detailed section of this video. I'm going to mix them in with our pork cubes here, and then we're going to start grinding. Now we have everything thoroughly mixed into our cube pork, and what I'm going to do now next is work on the setup on my KitchenAid grinder. This is one that's detailed in Charcuterie, the Michael Ruhlman book, and this also is what most people are going to have at home. You can buy this grinder attachment, and you also need the stuffer attachment for your KitchenAid. So the majority of the parts for my KitchenAid are going to be in my freezer. I put them in here about an hour ago, and that's going to make sure that everything that I'm using is thoroughly chilled. You can see that there's a nice layer of frost on all of this. The reason for that is also the reason why our meat is cold. We don't want smear when we're grinding. If you're smearing your meat, you're not going to get that nice definition. When you slice through your salami, you want nice chunks of fat along with your meat. And keeping everything as cold as possible is really going to go a long way to having that happen. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to set this up here. We're just putting our auger in right now, sliding it all the way back. Then your blade goes on next, just sets into the front here. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to put our grinder plate on. We're using the coarse ground today. I'm just going to do one grind. I like a coarser definition on my sausage. They won't affect the cure. If you want to grind it twice, if you like a finer definition, you can do that. Now I'm just going to hand tighten this on. That's an important step. I'm just putting it on by hand. I'll tighten it down a little bit. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start grinding. I'm putting my cube meat down inside. I'm going to work at setting number 4 on my KitchenAid grinder. If you go too high, you'll burn up your motor. If you go too low, again, this auger won't be spinning fast enough to get the meat through the plate in time. It'll heat up, it'll start smearing, and you'll have bad definition on your sausage. So now we're just going to start grinding. I'm going to prime my auger up a little bit. I don't want to start this completely dry. You'll be burning your plate. So what we're going to do is we're just going to turn it on, and I'm going to press down with one hand. I'm going to keep loading my meat in with the other. So now our sausage is all ground up. We've run this through our coarse plate one time on our KitchenAid mixer. Now this for me is just how I want my sausage to turn out. I've got nice big chunks of fat, and I've got good definition in the rest of my meat. If this is a little too coarse for you, which it could be for some of you out there, you can run it through your coarse grinder one more time. But for my purposes, this is about ready to stuff. The last thing I'm going to do is I have maybe 1/4 cup, a little bit less, of some nice red wine. I'm going to pour that in, and that's just going to make it easier for me to case this. It'll make the mixture a little bit easier to work with, and it'll also go a little bit towards lowering that initial pH. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to work this in until I don't have any wine floating around in my meat mixture. It'll be really readily absorbed by the meat. And so the next thing I'm going to do after I've got this mixed in pretty well is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to set up my stuffing horn. Now your KitchenAid stuffer came with a small and a large horn, and what we're going to be using today is our large horn here. Now you also need your adapter. Now your adapter sits right into these holes here, goes right into the front, and the next thing you do is you take your horn, drop it through, and we're just going to tighten that down. Again, hand tightening is tight enough for this. As your meat's coming through, that's going to be good enough. You don't need to be worrying about locking it down with your plunger. It'll be way too tight if you do that. And so now we're going to start stuffing. Again, we're going to be stuffing on setting number 4. I'm going to feed some of these casings that we've cleaned before. You can look at the video on how to do that. And what we're going to start out with is I'm going to just use my hand. It's a little bit greasy from the meat. And I'm going to start putting these casings on. So what I'm looking for is the opening end here, which if you cleaned your casings the way I showed you before, it should be sitting on the outside of your bowl. I'm just going to get a little bit of water in here so that the inside of the casing is lubricated. And then all I'm doing is I'm holding with this hand to make sure I'm not getting a bunch of water in here. I don't want extra water in my sausage. Again, water is bacteria's friend that's going to let it grow. And we're just going to put some of this on. Just case a little bit on here. And when I think that I've got enough, which is probably about, I don't know, 2/3 of my horn here for 2.5 pounds of sausage, I'm just going to stop. I'm going to use the edge and just tear that off. Now I'm ready to go. For you at home who aren't used to making sausage, it's probably best if you put a little knot in the end of your casing here. It's not something I usually do, but you know, it's always good to demonstrate the best way to do things. So we're going to put that all the way to the front, and we're going to start loading up our auger a little bit at a time here. Now the trick with these KitchenAids is if you get too much meat down in the feed tube, it's not going to stuff. It's going to come back up around your plunger. So you want a handful, and I like to shape them like this into little round logs, and that way when I start my grinder up, put it on setting 4, it'll get sucked down into there. Now I'm going to get some initial airflow out of here. Now what I want to do is I want to take a knife and I'm just going to pop the edge of that so that I don't have all this extra air inside of my casing. I want this to be as tight as possible. I'm going to come through at the end and I'm going to poke a bunch of holes through this, but initially I want these to be some nice solid sausages. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start putting it in, you know, making these nice little logs. I'm going to start feeding it down, push with my left hand down on the plunger, and then my right hand is just going to catch the meat as it comes out here. I like to put a bowl down below it so that I get a nice effective stuff. And as you see, I'm using these 32-35 casings, which makes a pretty large diameter sausage, which will mean that my cure time is going to be about 3 weeks on these. And as you can see here, it's a little bit complicated with one person, but it is possible. You can do this alone. So I'm just going to keep feeding this up, making sure that I have a nice, tight sausage coming out the other end. I'm just going to keep feeding it down again. You are going to have some buildup around your plunger. As long as you make these balls small enough to fit down inside the feed tube, you're not going to end up with too much of an issue. Again, I'm just feeding this up onto my horn until I get a nice sausage. Now I like to make my sausage about that long, you know, about 6, 7, 8 inches. Now I'm going to create a little space here to delineate where my next sausage is going to start, and I'm going to come back in and keep stuffing. So now our sausage is all cased up here, our salami is ready to go in the cure chamber. We just have a couple more steps that we need to do. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a nice sterile needle. I just have a sewing needle here. I've heated the end up with a lighter. You can do this over a gas stove. You can see the end is all burnt up here. That's just going to sterilize it, make sure I'm not putting bacteria into my sausage. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to come through here, and all I'm doing is holding onto the needle and I'm just poking through, especially if I see a pocket with a nice big chunk of air like right here. You can see I'm going to poke a hole right in top of that, and I'm going to take these sausages, I'm going to poke them all over the place as much as I can. This is going to help with the evaporation process, and it's also going to help with the next step that we're going to do, which is to try to twist as much of this air out of here as possible. I want these casings real tight on the salami, and what that's going to do is that it's going to ensure that I don't have case rot happen on the outside, which is where the outside of my sausage dries faster than the inside of my sausage. I want the sausage to continuously lose moisture at the same rate all throughout those cells through evaporation. Like we've talked about before, these sausages are going to want equilibrium with the air inside of our cure chamber. So we're going to keep our cure chamber at a low relative humidity relative to these sausages, and that is going to ensure a nice even dry time. So you can see I poked them all over. I'm going to start with my sausage where I have my tied end, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the end here, and all I'm doing is I'm twisting down and squeezing. Now you don't want to do this until it seems like your salami is going to pop, but you can see, you know, where you made your little holes, there'll be a little bit of meat coming out, and you'll be able to see where your sausage looks like it's really nice and tight. Like that, it just looks perfect. So I'm going to move on to my next link here. And the secret with linking sausage is if I twist this sausage this direction, I want to come on my next link and I want to go the opposite direction with it. Now what that's going to do is it's going to lock off these twists, which as it dries will become a nice hard piece between them. But what it's going to ensure, if I twisted these the same way as they sat in the cure chamber, they would spin like a clock and they would untwist themselves, and then you wouldn't have nice tight sausages. So at this point as I'm twisting, if I see like right here where I still have air pockets, I'm going to come back in with my sterile needle and I'm going to poke holes in those. I'm going to make sure that my meat is really nice and tight against these sausage casings. I'm going to do this all the way through. So again, we're locking off, going the opposite direction, we're twisting here, making sure that I don't have any big air bubbles. Move to our next sausage, and then we'll work on our last big link here. It's nice if you can do an even amount of links so that you can have pairs of sausage. They hang the best in the curing chamber. It didn't work out that way for this batch, but that's the best solution. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tie a little loop here so that I can hang this effectively in my cure chamber. So the last thing that we're going to do, like we talked about before, to make sure that your salami is safe to eat, we need to record the wet weight and compare that to the dry weight when it comes out. We want 30% moisture loss. The way we're going to measure that is by comparing our wet weight to our final weight. And if we lost a third of that, we know that we lost enough moisture to ensure that the water level inside the cells is low enough to inhibit bacterial growth. So what we're going to do is we're going to come through and we will take our sausage pairs. Again, we'll start with our first sausage, the one with that nice knot in the end here. We'll come, this will be a sausage pair, and I'll cut this down at the end. I want to leave a little bit of that twist there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find where it's linked up. See, that'll hang beautifully in our cure chamber. And what we're going to do, we're going to zero our scale out. I weigh everything in grams. It makes it easier to deal with. So I have 418 grams here. As you can see, I've got some tape laid out. All I'm going to do is I'm going to write down these weights, 418, so that I know when I pull these out, I can know what I'm aiming for. I want 2/3 of this weight for my final salami. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take this piece of tape and wrap it through. So now I have a great measuring stick, so I know exactly how much this is supposed to weigh when it's done. So I'll do this with our final salamis here, and then we will show you how to make your mold inhibitor culture, and we'll spray that on, and you'll be. The final step that we need to do for our salami before we put it into the cure chamber is to create our mold culture that we're going to be spraying on the outside. What I have here is just scrapings from old projects. I took them once they were nice and covered in a nice white mold. When they come out, I just scrape them into this jar here. I'm going to use like a 1/4 teaspoon of this into a solution that's about a 1/2 cup, maybe a little bit less, of hot water. Again, this water is about 112 degrees, which is perfect. You want it about 110 to 120 degrees. That's all that I'm going to need. I have a little bit of dextrose that I've already mixed into this water when it was hot, dissolved it into there. You want to make sure that you're using purified or distilled water. That way there's nothing like chlorine that will kill the mold culture before it even gets to your sausage. So now this is mixed up, it's ready to go. We'll put it in our bottle, spray it on our salami, and in 2 to 3 weeks we'll come back and we'll have the end result for you. So thanks so much for watching these videos, and I hope this gives you a better understanding of how to do some charcuterie.